Well, hello and welcome to the Pig Daily, episode number 32, where we teach you how to think about StarCraft and use your own brain and not blindly think about build orders and copy what people tell you to do without actually comprehending all the other little cool things that go into it. So thanks for hanging out, guys. It is another cool winter's morning here. July has started and we're in the deepest, darkest depths of Australian winter, which is nowhere near as bad as the winter for anyone that's watching. But thanks for hanging out. We're going to be talking about beginner basics today. We're sticking to our new schedule where at the start of the week, the first day is always going to be beginner basics. And today we're talking about learning how to scout. And this is something people always ask about. They always say, especially when they get coaching from me, but always on forums as well, people say, you know, like, how do I scout? Or, well, I don't know how to read. Like, what does it mean when my opponent has two gases? What does it mean? Like, what's the difference between one gas and two gas? And I always kind of like pause and I go like, well, I could explain that, but it's really not helpful for most people. Like there's so many things in StarCraft, and you hear pros talk about, oh, well, I saw this gas, so it meant this, or I saw that production building down at like 3 minutes 20, therefore it meant this. That's something which is so deep down the rabbit hole of scouting before you get to that point, and before you can actually kind of make sense of that stuff. So it's something where today I want to kind of go right back to, well, let's talk about how you get to the point where you can actually look at your scouting and say, he's missing a gas on his natural, therefore he's probably doing a big attack. How do you get there? Where do you start with scouting? Especially for newer players, where do you begin? And this is something which I'm sure there'll be nuggets in here which help players at higher levels. I would say if you're Masters Plus, you're probably not going to learn too much new today, but hopefully you enjoy kind of just getting a refresher and having a think about it. And if you're showing one of your friends kind of how to play, who's a newer player, hopefully you can teach them the same sort of method which I'm going to talk about. So we're going to talk about a few different stages that you should usually go through in order in terms of getting used to scouting, right? From the very first time you hop onto ladder through to when you're actually in Master League and you're making all these sick reads and you know all the build orders and it all kind of clicks in your head. So we're not going to focus too much on that latter part. We're just going to kind of talk about how you get there and then just give a brief intro on it. So what we're going to do today, we might as well just start out with me just hopping into game, and I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to show a Zerg, and definitely some of the earlier points, by the way, are more Zerg. I would say not more Zerg specific, but they're easier to do as Zerg. However, if you're Terran and Protoss, especially at lower levels, you want to do the same thing, even though pro gamers might not necessarily do it. So how about we just dive on in, and I'm up against an AI here, by the way. So let me just throw my hotkeys on, because I actually put it on a harder AI. And last time I played an AI during the show, it kicked my ass because I was so busy talking. So today we're going to remember to pause and kind of swap to our camera whenever we're doing that. And yeah, and we're just going to kind of talk you guys through all of the key things that you need to be focusing on when you're scouting. Now, it's not all going to be me playing against an AI while we do today's session. There are going to be points where I do other things. We're going to go and look at a replay of Hydraverse Pult from my my What If Wednesday show, just as an example of analyzing and breaking down scouting information as well, because I think that there was a cute timing attack in there, which we can talk about. So I'm just building up here at the start, but you know what? What's really important is to always send a worker scout. Now this is one of the most important things you want to be doing when you first start out in StarCraft, and even at GM level, I think a lot of players, even in matchups like Zerg vs Erg, where worker scouting isn't important, players could benefit from doing this. And there's a few players who've like kind of always stood outside the meta and have refused to just follow what everyone else does. Ghost User, back in the day, is a player who like never stopped drone scouting, because he always said, well, this just takes the chance out of the matchup. It allows me to see what my opponent's done at the start of the game. And what I always found funny is a lot of players would say like, that's shit, it's bad. And this is, I guess I was already touching on this before, right? People will say like, oh, you don't need to do that. No, that's a waste of money. And it's like, really. It gives you 100% information on what you're opening your opponent's done. And okay, let's face it, the way a lot of players play, they don't really have a set reaction with this early worker scout. They don't have anything where they see what a normal build and they go, oh, I'm going to do this to take advantage of that. So I guess on one level, it's like, well, what are you scouting for? If you're just scouting to identify a cheese that's coming, well, you don't need to do that. Because if you're a GM, even if you don't see the cheese coming, most of the time with these early attacks, if you respond with a very tight list of reactions, you can still shut it down. Awesome. Yeah, guess what? Your friend who you're just showing how to play the game and you're telling it isn't worth drone scouting or SCV scouting every game, if they don't have early warning of a rush coming, they're going to get stabbed in the gut and they're just going to fall over and bleed on the ground. It's going to be a really sad way for them to lose, and they're not going to have any comprehension of how they died. So this is something where I feel like every race, every matchup, and you can do this for your entire StarCraft career, but you should definitely do it for your first few months or your first, right up until you hit Diamond, is always send a worker scout out right on early, usually around the time you finish your first supply structure. And what you want to be doing with this worker is just kind of looking around their base, and you want to be looking for anything that's crazy out of the ordinary. Now, you don't need to recognize exactly how your opponent's builds work. You don't need to recognize exactly what everything means. But what we see here is like, okay, do we see signs of a rush? Well, we see a chrono boosted gateway, another gateway, a cyber. Okay, so he's getting up 2 gates pretty early. So there's some potential for aggression there, right? But nothing too crazy. The buildings are actually there. What we'd really be looking for with this is, what if there's just no buildings in the base? What if we get there and you're like, well, there's like just no buildings. And you're like, oh, well, he's proxied gateways. He's built 4 gateways outside your base. Like, he's super all in or something like that. That's the sort of stuff you're looking for most of all with your early worker scout. And as you get better, you're going to start looking for other things with that as well. You're going to be saying, has he got a fast expansion? If he has, then I know I'm safe. And you start to just get this kind of general feel for what it looks like when your opponent's going to be more aggressive. You get a general feel for spotting things like, oh, hey, that's a forge they're building really early. I know what that means. A forge means he's going to come and build photon cannons in my base. And just getting a feel for that stuff, giving yourself early warning of all of the sneaky shenanigans, is going to be so damn helpful. Now that's stage 0 of scouting. This isn't even a stage. It's so easy to just send a worker across to their side of the base. And even as a rookie player, it won't take you too long to figure out what the big signs of the rushes are. As Zerg, it's when you see a very early spawning pool. If it's a Terran or Protoss, as I said, it's if there's just no buildings in their base, which means they built their buildings outside your base. So they're just going to be building those units really quickly and rushing them in to try and kill you. So you're just looking for no expansion, which is obviously, you know, are they expanding, are they not? And are there signs of those early rushes? Very simple. Obviously, if they are doing the early rush, you just try to get units out. You try to learn your response for each situation, little bit by little bit. Today, we're talking about learning to scout, though. And there's so many different early rushes, and each one, depending on your race, depends on a slightly different response. So we're not going to talk about that. If you want to learn all about defending all-ins, check out one of my dailies on defending all-ins or the art of defense, where we talk about that. So the next stage, and this is where we really start to focus on what's important for your scouting. And this is something you may have heard me say it before, you may have heard other players say it before, and it's people say, oh, you know, I'm in silver or bronze, I really want to start scouting, but I don't know how to interpret the information, so I don't see any point in it. Like, you know, what should I do to scout? And normally what we'll say is, don't bother. What's more important at your level is map control. You need to have map vision. And this is stage 1 of scouting, and it sounds basic and it sounds like, yeah, like you're not good enough for scouting it, but that's not the case. Map control is bloody hard, and using map control is a skill which takes a while to actually learn and develop. And you really need to be able to do that before you're ready to move on to the next step. So with step 1, you want to be getting units all over the map as much as possible, especially as Zerg. It's nice and easy because you have these cheap little buggers that only cost 25 minerals each. But as the other races, you can do it as well. Now there's a few nice mechanics which you can use to actually put the scouts everywhere. If you guys are curious as to how I'm sending my Zerglings out quickly, I want you to go and check out my fundamental mechanics daily, because that's where we talk about that. Obviously, because this is a beginner basics, I'm kind of referencing a lot of other videos just so newer players watching can figure that out. But what we want is vision. So we want a Zergling outside their base. We want a Zergling at the third. Zergling at the potential fourth. Any base that he could take, we want. We also want one outside his base. So this one at his natural is watching him leaving his base. And then we also want vision on the edges of the map to spot drops. So let's send some Zerglings up on the edges. And oh, this map has watchtowers, which makes that nice and easy. And alright, let's just hold position there. Now, what you're going to notice is if you take a look at my minimap, is suddenly it starts to look sexy. If you're a dirty Zerg player, you get very excited when you have vision everywhere because it actually stops you dying to stupid stuff. So you can see the moment an attack moves out of their base, number one. You can see also, look at this, we've got overlords outside our base. But if as a Terran player or a Protoss player, often you'll just leave like a worker or a probe or an adept outside your base so that you've always got warning. If he's on the map somewhere, you want to see when his army moves up. You don't want to just have your army chilling here and then suddenly he's like on top of you and you've been looking in your main base doing some injects or some macro, and then suddenly you look back at your army and everything's just getting destroyed. Like, that sucks. That's the worst way to lose. So vision outside your base, vision outside his base, and vision all over the edges of the map and at the potential expansions. Whoa. Oh, we're at a very important point. This is a good point to pause right here, because we're gonna talk about how we now use this map control. How do we interpret this information? All right. So first of all, outside their base. That's the Zergling we just saw on screen. We can see here, and his whole job is to see, oh no, my opponent's moving out on the map. He's coming with an attack. And the first thing you need to do whenever you recognize that is you need to assess it, and you need to just say, oh, that's scary, or that's not scary. This is something I always talk about. Whenever you see an attack coming, you just kind of compare that to your own army, and you just kind of go like, yeah, my army can crush that. If you can crush it, you just like, who cares, ignore it, just send some more lings back out on the map. If he comes to push me, just go fight him, we'll be fine. But if you see a scary push, something which looks quite intimidating, you're not sure you can necessarily fight it, or you're quite sure you can't fight it, that's when you really start reacting hard, getting out as much extra defense as you can, trying to get a nice defensive position, and really focusing on trying to hold on and survive. Put all your focus on that defense. So on the most basic level, we're already having scouting reactions here. We're giving ourselves forward warning of attacks that are coming, and a little bit of a buffer time in order to get extra preparation going. So that's going to help us out in that regard. But we've also got guys on the edges of the map. So what are they there for? They're there to spot drops, void rays, banshees coming along the edges. Now, well, are you really going to always see those units coming? Not necessarily, but you will notice that even if your Terran or Protoss players will put those Marines out on the edges, they'll put like a probe, or even sometimes build like a random pylon on the edge of the map. And at low levels, this is especially important because what you need to train yourself to do is get used to watching that mini-map. Whenever you're doing something just by rote, or you're not having to think too much about what's happening, you're always just glancing back at that mini-map. Your eyes are kind of going down to that bottom left-hand side of your screen. And having map control is one of the best ways to train yourself to do this. So if throughout the entire game, you've got this vision all over the place, you're going to give yourself many opportunities to spot these big red dots walking across that minimap. You're going to give yourself many opportunities staring down here to see where all these units could come across. And that's going to make it just so much more powerful for you. Back on that topic of not doing what pros are doing, Terran and Protoss players will say, well, actually, at this point of the game, you can't have map control because your opponent has mobility. And that's definitely true at the higher levels. There's certain points where one race has the mobility, the other player usually has to kind of get off the map for a little bit. That's okay. There will be periods where you don't have complete map control, but you really do want to be trying to send units out as much as you can. And especially at the lower levels, it doesn't really matter if your race has less mobility because players struggle with the APM requirements of kind of getting out there on the map. You should be able to just keep sending out probes, zealots, marines into these spots on the map. And even if they clear them up once or twice, you can just replace them and it should work completely fine. Getting the vision out there and doing this as an exercise is just going to make you so much more solid. Getting the warning of when those attacks come, seeing what's happening, and giving yourself time to mentally prepare for the engagements as well. So you're so much better and on top of microing them when they do come. Okay, so cool. All right, so let's dive into game here, and we'll play this out. So we go. Okay, that's a scary army. Now, why is that a scary army? Because we've only got some Zerglings. So we're gonna say, all right, that's a little bit scary. Let's build more units. Make sure we've got plenty of Zerglings, which I'm pretty sure we do. Yeah, we got plenty of Zerglings. And because I now think, actually, you know what? I think I got plenty of Zerglings. I think I can crush that. Let's go kill it. So here we go. Because I assessed it and said, yeah, it's kind of scary, but oh, actually we do have a lot of Zerglings. I made that call to say I can go fight this. Whereas if I was more scared of this army, I'd wait back on creep. I'd try to get like a flank going. You know, I'd be more careful and precise. So that's the difference between a scary army and a non-scary army. Now besides that, what else are you doing? Through map control, you are actually scouting what your opponent's up to. Yes, you're not scouting their exact tech and so on, but you're keeping track of their economy. Notice how we've got vision. At these bases, we know the number of bases our opponent's at. And this is where you start to get your first level of reacting to your opponent's economy. So this is on stage 1 of scouting. You say, he's on 2 bases. And then, as a general rule, you have a rule of a safe amount. Oh, that's a lot of units. To which you can drone. So you say, if he's got a second base, I at most want to be at 3 bases mining. Somewhere between 2.5 to 3 bases mining. So we can say, oh, you're on 2 bases. All right, we've got 2 bases fully mining. And we've got a 3rd base getting closer to fully mining as well. And that's kind of the safe zone. You don't want to go beyond that. If you go beyond a full base ahead of your opponent, that's when you start to get to crazy land, because it's just simple maths. You've spent your money on workers, which a few minutes down the track, well, they'll profligate. They'll mine so much, they'll pay for themselves, that it won't be a risk. But in the short term, you've spent your money on economy. He's spent his money on units rather than economy. So he's just got way more army than you have. And if he decides to attack, you'll just die. Just simple maths, just a basic assessment there. So as a general rule, you say, if I always stop at about half a base of workers more than my opponent, at most 1 base ahead, then I should be good to go. And you should be able to shut down anything that comes your way. So as a general rule, even though you're not really keeping tight tabs on how many gases your opponent's taking, their exact worker count, just seeing as they take new bases is going to give you that rough estimate of where their economy is at. It's going to stop you from going up to 5 bases on workers while your opponent's on 1 base for 10 minutes. And this is something we see all the time in bronze with brand new players, is they maybe get some good tips off a friend. They say, like, I want to start out with getting good macro. And they kind of dive into game and they have the sickest macro. They don't have the map control or anything else. They don't realize their opponent's on 1 base. And they go, oh, my opponent cheesed me, man. I keep getting cheesed. And it's like, well, yeah, like, I guess your opponent was on 1 base, so like you can kind of call it a cheese, but it hit like after like 8 minutes. And you had 5 bases of workers up. Like, if you stopped at 2 or 3 bases, you still would have crushed this. So it's just something where you're getting these basic reactions down, and this is the first tier, and it really is important just to get used to that. So just to summarize that first tier, it's all about leaving units all over the map, having units outside your base as well. So later on, maybe you don't have an overlord, leaving a Zergling there to give warning. And every now and then, you also want to just send in units to scout. And you want to send in units to sacrifice. So you might just send in an overseer. Now, I don't have a lair, so we're just going to send an overlord. If you're Protoss, you're using an observer. If you're Terran, you might scan. You might just stim a marine in. You might just run a Zergling in. And what you want to be looking for here is their army composition. And this is the other big thing you need to do, is you need to start making these compositional adjustments. However, this is something which people actually get too excited about in StarCraft. They say StarCraft's a strategy game. I know what strategy is about. Strategy is about you building the units to counter your opponent's units. And they go, you know what? Let's look at this army. Stalkers, Sentries, and Zealots. You know, I heard that Ultralisks are really good versus those units. I need to drop everything else I'm doing, and I need to go for Ultralisks right now. Come on, let's get an Infestation Pit. Let's go to Hive. And people just kind of start making these, like, I need to counter that army. And what people need to kind of remember is you don't necessarily need to counter your opponent's army. Most of the time, you should have a general compositional game plan before you go into the game. And that game plan should be good against most things. You don't need to drastically change what you're doing. People want to get into the strategy. They want to dive into the strategy. And there's a lot of strategy without the composition. I would say compositional choices is like the lowest tier of strategy and the most irrelevant tier of strategy when it comes to StarCraft. Yes, it's important. It definitely is. But most of the time, you don't actually need to adapt your composition at all. You have a solid game plan. You say, I'm going to go Roach Slings into Infestors into Ultras. Against 90% of the armies you scout, you just keep on building with that same general game plan you had. You don't actually adjust. The thing is, a lot of players kind of get excited with this idea of adjusting their composition and moving it along, but it's more about the timing that units come out in StarCraft. It's much more about how much you invest to get units out at a specific time. And this is a very advanced concept, and it's really what we're going to be talking about more later in Stage 4, where you really understand everything. But it's about, if someone's on one base massing Void Rays, it's very different if they're on 3 bases massing Void Rays. Like, there's this whole completely different spectrum of what a person's investing to get units out at a specific timing. And that's much more important than you actually having to react hard in one way. So for example, if someone's going mass air, that's what we're really scouting for right now. That's why we're sending these units in. We're looking for really out of the ordinary things where we actually need to go and adjust to that. If we see, oh, he's massing Void Rays, okay, we need to make sure our army shoots up. That's it. You don't need to look for any specific magical hard counter. It's just looking to make sure your army generally works against their army. If they're going for mass, lots of siege tanks and lots of marauders, and you happen to be building a pure roach army, well, maybe you should be changing things up because marauders and tanks happen to be good against that. There's a few general situations, but most of the time you're just looking for mass air. You're looking for someone who's just fast teching and has no army out as well. So it's not necessarily just compositional, actually. Let's take a look in game. So if I'm scouting, I also am going to be looking for things like, I got a pretty big army, but I'm not that experienced as a player. I don't know how big my army is compared to my opponents. I don't know if I should be afraid. I don't know if they're being really greedy and I should kill them. So you kind of look at that army and you make another assessment. You get used to assessing that army and comparing it to yours. And right now I look at those two armies, I say, yeah, it's pretty similar. But if you go up there and you see like a sentry and nothing else, that can trigger you to just go like, I should kill you now. And you just kind of walk across the map and kill your opponent. And that's like something where you're not having to put that much thought into it. You're not comparing their gas count or going insane. You're just looking at how much units they have and what they're building with it. Alright, so let's take a look at me notes here, because I wrote out a lot of notes for today, and I feel like I've missed a point, but so we talked about unit sacrifices. At this stage you don't care about looking at the base. Yeah, so that's something to stress with this whole stage of scouting. Like, you're not looking at their base. You're not interpreting their buildings. At stage 0, yeah, you scouted their base at the very beginning with a worker, but you were just looking for anything crazy out of the ordinary. So don't make that common rookie mistake, guys, of trying to react to every single unit you see in their army. Like, he has one of this, therefore I need to change up my composition. Just stick with your standard, relatively solid composition. If you're going Marine Marauder, Medevac, that's good against most things. You don't need to change it up usually. If you're going for Stalker Disruptor or Stalker Colossus, you don't really need to change that up against most things. So focus on having the right sort of units to deal with their stuff, especially if they go for something kind of crazy, but otherwise you should be good. So the next step is going to be scouting their base and understanding responses. So this is a fun part. So this is where we start to finally look at their base and actually assess it. And we start to categorize everything into different areas of the game. By the way, I see some people in chat talking about different things. If you guys have questions, please use the @x5_pig tag. Spam them out in chat. We'll be answering questions at the end. So now let's talk about categorizing that information. So what you really want to do, and let's get some overlord speed. Let's get a bunch of overseers so we can run through this exercise. Oh, he's attacking us. That's a scary army. Therefore, building lots of units. The AI does not know how to use force fields. That's cute. Leave me, fool. Leave me. So yeah, basically what we want to be looking at is, once we've shoved him home, is scouting their base. And you want to be dividing everything into one of two categories: signs of greed and signs of aggression. And you can use this as every race in every matchup. Scouting Zerg is a little bit different to the others. I talk about that in detail in my scouting Zerg daily, did the other week. But what you want to be doing is you want to come through and you want to look at this. You want to be like, what am I looking at? And what are we looking at? How the hell do you interpret all of this, especially if you've never played that race? Well, it takes a little bit of work, doesn't it? It takes a little bit. So what we want to have is a general categorization. First of all, you say in the greed category, what you're looking for is extra bases. So command centers, hatcheries, nexi, upgrades, forge, so that's forges, armories, evo chambers, lots of add-ons. That's a Terran specific one. If a Terran has lots of add-ons, then that's a sign of greed, because he's building for the future. He's not just trying to get units out as quickly as possible right then. And also lots of tech paths. For instance, if you see Robo, Stargate, and Twilight, they're not just going to all in you, because it's like, well, I built these 3 tech structures. I got half a Void Ray built, 1 Observer, and I started Blink, and now I'm going to attack you. Like, it doesn't make sense until later on for them to actually be aggressive. So these are all signs of greed. It's signs of them investing in their economy. It's them investing later into the game. And this is always a fantastic way to divide information, because when you see, you've all probably been in that game, especially some of the more experienced players watching, where you're like, yeah, you know, I watch pro games, I try to use pro build orders. Most of the time people in my league use pro build orders, and then you'll play someone on ladder and like you scout their base and it just makes 0 sense. It's like, I don't know. It's like they just didn't learn how to build a base properly. Like everything is just ramshackle. They've got units and structures going down in completely random order. It's like if you're playing against Haas, but instead of proxying the structures, you just built them in his main base, and you just go through and you're like, oh yeah, he's got like the Twilight Council into Forge, into double Stargate, into triple Robo on one base. You'd just be like, what the shit? And you've got no idea how to interpret this information. So dividing into these categories actually is a fantastic way to break that down. And no matter how weird and unfamiliar the build is, you can still make a read and use that to adjust yourself. So what we're going to be talking about with this is you kind of weigh up how far they are towards greed and how far they are towards economy. Aggression. Greed/economy versus aggression. And you need to figure out where you want to go. Now, your general game plan is smack bang in the middle. Your general game plan is just kind of like, you just kind of progress in this general way. You get a mix of economy and units, like that's down the middle is your game plan. And the reason you want to scout here is you want to figure out like, oh, are they all signs of aggression? Oh, okay, I'm going to go deal with that. Or are they all signs of greed? Am I going to respond in a different way? So let's look here in this particular game and let's try and divvy these up a little bit. So with my Overseer, what do I see? I see 3 Stargates, 2 Forges, and 2 Robos. Okay, so already we see multiple tech trees. I don't see Twilight. Oh, yes, we do. So that's like triple tech. So that's a big sign of greed. Okay, double upgrades, 2 Forges. That's a full sign of greed. If it was just 1 Forge, I'd say it's like half a sign of greed. Okay, what about down here? We've got a base, we've got a 3rd base. And obviously it's timing specific, and you do want to start kind of scouting at specific timings every game, but oh, and a 3rd base. All right, lots of signs of greed. So if he's getting all those signs of greed, then I can respond. And how do I want to respond? Well, I can just build a lot of drones, and I can go even greedier than him. I can go, yeah, let's get like double Spire or something. I don't know. I'm just going to get all the tech because I feel like, let's get a Nidus Worm as well. Whatever you think is useful to the situation, but as long as it's things which are useful down the line. Or I could have just committed to masses of units and tried to kill my opponent, saying, well, if you're investing in economy, tech, economy, if I just mass units, I might be able to just kill you. And that definitely could have worked as well. So always kind of just tally up everything you see in their base, divide it into those signs of greed. Now, what about the signs of aggression? I didn't specifically mention what those were. But usually signs of aggression are just the lack of the signs of greed. So signs of aggression are like, well, there's no third base, there's no upgrades. It's pretty stupid, but that's it. Signs of aggression is just the lack of the signs of greed, plus a few specific things. So for Zerg, for instance, you want to scout if there's not many drones on their bases, then that's a sign of aggression, right? Scouting a lot of drones on their bases is a sign of greed. That's a Zerg specific one. Also, what's popping out of eggs. If you scout a Zerg player and there's fighting units popping out of their eggs, sign of aggression. And there's lots of production with no add-ons pumping for Terran. So if they're building out of structures with no add-ons, that's a sign of aggression. So there's a few different ones. Obviously, if you just see a shit ton of gateways or a shit ton of barracks going down, then that's also somewhat a sign of aggression. So yeah, you want to kind of just tally that up, figure it out as you go, and kind of go into that. So we're going to go into a replay now. I'm going to exit out of that game while I keep talking about this. We're going to take a look at that Pulp vs Hydra replay, and this is just a timing attack we're going to be looking at, Hellbat timing, and it's a really good way for us to just kind of look at it and say like, oh, okay, you know, he's going for this. So sorry, the game music's funny. What the hell? Oh right, I put my hotkeys back on the core. I was sitting here going Control M and I was like, why is this not working right now? So yeah, generally what you want to be looking for is those signs of greed and those signs of aggression. You want to be categorizing that and kind of laying those out and trying to figure out exactly which way it is. So we talked about that idea of how you always start in the middle and then you figure out which way you want to go, or which side of the line they are. And the thing is, if you see just one sign of aggression, say you see someone just building out of structures with no add-ons, like it doesn't mean that much on its own. But if you see 3 signs of aggression, you're like, he's going all in, he's trying to kill me. If you see 3 signs of greed, you're like, he's going pure economy, I don't need to worry about being attacked forever. He's going full greed mode. So you can always make these assessments. But I did touch on something just before, and I said, but it is timing specific, right? If you scout someone taking a third at 17 minutes into the game, you don't go, oh, this guy's going super greedy. No, because it's way later. So you do want to start to get some general standard scouting timings based on your own knowledge of each matchup. It's something you'll develop over time. I'm not going to say right now, this is the best time to scout in every matchup. It's something you do need to kind of develop through your own understanding a bit. And every league's a little bit different as well. So I'm going to be talking about pro gamer ZVT timings right now. And if you're talking about ZVT or TBZ as well, you can just push those timings back, say a minute, and then suddenly it's roughly on par with Gold League. If you're in Bronze, maybe push it back 2 minutes. So what I like to do, playing against high-level players, and what a lot of people like to do, is scout around 3 minutes 30 against Terran. So we see here the in-game clock, it's about 3 minutes 40 right now. So if you scout at like 4 minutes 30 at most non-pro gamer levels, that's a pretty good time. And you want to go through. So let's look at this from Hydra's point of view. Like I said, this is Hydra versus Pulp. So he comes through. What's he going to see? Let's imagine he sees everything that's going on. Let's imagine he has that perfect scout, which never actually happens in the game. And he sees, well, there's no third command center. Sign of aggression number 1. He says, there's no add-ons on this barracks and starport. They're both just trying to get units out. Sign of aggression number 2. There's no engineering bays. Sign of aggression number 3. 3 signs of aggression. Ding ding. We just hit the magic count. You literally ring your gong of I'm being all in. This is like the equivalent of in Age of Empires or like Warcraft 3, where you ring the town bell, get your peasants to pick up their fucking guns and run over and get in the town hall and start shooting arrows. Because you know you're getting all in. You know your opponent's attacking you. He's committing everything to that right now. It doesn't mean he's not going to transition down the line. Maybe all in's a bad word. A very heavily committed timing attack, we could call it. It's a really, really big attack, you know. There is a transition behind it, but it needs to get damage done. This is a strong attack. So even with no familiarity with this build, we've already kind of said, like, we saw 3 signs of aggression, therefore I've just got to build lots of stuff. Of course, looking at this specific build, as I said, it's a Hellbat timing, and the way this build works is there's an armory going down in the back, production tab, there we go. And it can hit really fast with a full marine of medevacs and 6 Hellbats, all at about 4 minutes 30. which is bloody good. Bloody strong timing, mate. So he's going to break in here, and yeah, we see exactly what we're talking about. Very powerful timing attack. Hellbat's getting in there, drones having to run away, and who would have known? 3 signs of aggression equals I'm going to YOLO into your base with them Hellbats and Marines. And the game was pretty much over from here. He also rallied a Liberator behind this. Now, let's imagine Hydra held this attack. Let's imagine that things did not go quite as awry as they did. Let's imagine Hydra said, okay, I've held it, I'm droning up, and he goes for a follow-up scout, and he says, what are you going for now? Are you continuing to all in? Let's take a look. Pulse base, still no 3rd command center, still no engineering bays. All there is extra barracks going down. Therefore, signs of aggression. Still only got a couple add-ons going as well. So once again, you can just apply that at any stage of the game, but especially the earlier stages, and it becomes very important. The later the game goes, the more and more it becomes just about that map control we were talking about earlier, and scouting their composition. Even at pro level, that's really what becomes important. So guys, what you're really doing is a little mathematical equation. So we talked there about your opponent having 3 signs of aggression. Now, there was really only one response to that. It was build a lot of stuff and just survive. That's it. That's all Hydra had to do. He actually ended up restarting the game from the same situation, microing his roaches a bit better, and then holding in that episode of What If Wednesdays. So sometimes just microing a bit can help as well. But generally, the response, if you see 3 signs of aggression, is just build lots of units, try to defend, try to survive, and you should be in a good spot. However, what if your opponent does 3 signs of greed? What if they're going full economy? And this is where you start to get a lot more options in StarCraft. If your opponent's just going for your throat, obviously you just need to fucking defend your throat. Like, that's all you've got to do. But what if you're playing a situation where they're going full economy? How do your decisions open up in that scenario? So let's go into game. Let's go back to that scouting point, and let's imagine we see a completely different setup. This is where we get to use our mind's eye. All right, instead of this going down, let's imagine there's no armory. No second gas. Now the second gas, I'm not telling you guys to read into gas because that's complicated. However, that just would happen to not be here if the armory wasn't here. And if this was just like a Hellion medevac marine pressure, but there was also a 3rd command center here. Let's imagine there's 2 engineering bays going down now as well. Suddenly, if you scout this, you would say, well, I see 1 sign of aggression, because there's no add-ons on the barracks and the starport. He's still trying to pressure me hard. But I see 2 signs of greed. And you would say like, oh, but he's not fully greedy and he's not fully aggressive. What do I do? And like I said, you start off in the middle with your build. You're here. Him going all-in's over here. Him going greedy's over here. And you're saying, well, there's 2 signs of greed and 1 sign of aggression. So you're like, all right, that's pretty close to center. You know what? I don't even need to react. I can just do my standard thing. Your standard game plan should usually be reasonably well built to deal with that. So if you ever see a very close kind of mix of signals, a bit of aggressive signals, a bit of greedy signals, you don't need to make any hard, big change up to your play. Often just middle of the road play, and thinking about it in basic terms. Look at their production and say, well, he could have a medevac out or a liberator, so maybe I'll build a spore or 2, and I'll have a few roaches and lings to defend a drop. But other than that, we're just going to go economy. Just make a simple assessment like that. You don't need to go absolutely crazy and counter every single structure you see. That's the real beauty of calculating things into those general categories. And this is something pros do all the time. Is just kind of saying, oh yeah, that's something which is going to be aggressive. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to be aggressive. You know, the starport, for instance, it could be a medevac, it could be a liberator. They don't know, but it's all about figuring out, well, what's the overall potential? How much do I need to adjust to react? And then suddenly you find yourself in a good spot. Now let's also imagine if instead there was the 3rd command center, the double eBay, and both of these structures were building add-ons. We're looking at like triple greed. We got 3rd base, double eBays, and add-ons going down. And that's when you start to get those options I was talking about. So if your opponent's ever going full greed, you've got 2 options. One is to say, well, if he's committing in the long term, I can try to kill him very soon, before he gets a chance to get up his production, to get up more units, before all that economy, tech, upgrades, and infrastructure kicks in and actually has a chance to take effect. So you can just go, hold down the unit button, grab your army up and try to attack in the next minute or two. And that's one really good way to punish this. On the basic level, you've already figured out simply by categorizing your opponent's play into greedy play, you can just grab all your units and go and kill them. And that's got a really good chance of working. Hell, even if they've got 2 signs of greed, 1 sign of aggression, there's a good chance of that working. In this particular scenario, we're talking about the idea of, well, if they do like the medevac pressure, but then they've got the command center behind it, it's like, well, especially with Terran, they're just not going to have many units out because they don't have a lot of production down. On the other hand, if you see 3 signs of greed, how else can you take advantage of it? And this is kind of something you'd always see Snoot do. He sees them being greedy, and he holds down his drone key. You see a lot of players who will just go even greedier in response. They'll know that they can cut the corners. They say, 3 signs of greed, and they immediately assess that and say, well, you can't threaten me at all. How can I get ahead of you? I can go even greedier than you're going, because you're still building some safety units. You're still getting some modicum of safety, some small amount to kind of defend pressures. But me, I know 100% that your focus is on economy, is on the later stages, so I can just take a 4th base really early. I can get my double upgrades and my tech and my economy going all at once and overtake you in that regard. So that's how that kind of works out, and that's how you kind of assess it and you start to make decisions. So we are kind of drawing to a close now, guys. And yeah, I think we've covered that pretty well. So hopefully you guys kind of have a good understanding now of the sort of mental calculations that go into this. And keep in mind, what we've just talked about is bloody complicated. A lot of people kind of sometimes look down on shows like this where we dumb down the game or make it simple for newer players. Or sometimes players say, I'm not interested in that. I want to learn how to scout properly. I want to learn how to do it the way the pros do. But you really need to go through this step in order to get there. Excuse me. You need to go through this step to get there. So, yeah, actually understanding how to just use map control, how to just scout their army and generally assess it as being scary or not, how to look at your base, your opponent's base, and just divide things into signs of greed, signs of aggression. This is where understanding StarCraft really begins. And I think that's most of the key points. Now, we talked about stage 0, stage 1. That was stage 2 just then, scouting their base and actually looking at the buildings and dividing it. Stage 3 is the stage we're not going to talk about. Stage 3 is the next stage. That's what you do once you're past this level. It's not a proper topic for a beginner basics episode because, hell, a lot of people at the top of Diamond League don't really have a lot of understanding of Stage 3. Some people in Master League don't have a lot of understanding of Stage 3. Stage 3 gets really complicated, gets really complex. Stage 3 is where you're understanding exactly how your opponent's races work, how they build up, how their common build orders work, why and how they're efficient. That's about knowing all the timings. It's about knowing in PvT, if your opponent does a 1-base Widowmine Marine drop, it can hit you at exactly 4 minutes. So you need to therefore skip your Twilight Council, get 3 more gateways down, and that allows you to have 6 gateway units in a mothership core to completely shut down the drop when it comes in. Like, that's some detailed shit, which takes a while to get on top of. And I know a lot of players who learn 1 or 2 of these timings, a few of these important timings, even in the lower leagues. And that's fine. You can learn a few of those, but you're very rarely going to understand everything that goes into why the build works and all the possible transitions. And that's something you really get into later on in the game. You start to memorize all these different timings. You get to really assess the difference between someone, we kind of mentioned it before, someone massing Void Rays on 1 base who's completely all in and you just need to survive on 1.5 base economy, build lots of things that shoot up and you'll win, as opposed to someone on 3 base who's massing Sky Toss and all of the vast, complicated implications of someone turtling with cannons and Void Rays and carriers. And that's something for another day, and it's something we'll definitely revisit and talk about, is advanced scouting, reading into timings and understanding. And that's something we'd probably need to break down matchup by matchup, but we'll definitely be looking at it as we continue. So I think that's a good place to finish up the lecture part of the show. So let's answer a few questions in chat. I'm going to scroll on up and let's see what people have said. All right, Lixel says, Pig, about map control, wouldn't it be better for a newer player to position a unit on the attack paths to their base instead of in front of the enemy's base? I guess you could easier identify an attack if you can be sure that what is killing your scout is not just a scout of the opponent. Yeah, so getting quick at looking at your minimap is something which I was kind of mentioning earlier. It's that idea of like, so you're just sitting there in game, you're like going about your stuff. I know this is a replay, but let's imagine like, yeah, looking at my stuff. Oh, he killed my scout. Instantly like clicking on your minimap and looking up there, or having it hotkeyed and double tapping it and getting a glimpse of that army is actually really useful. Like that helps out a lot, because then you can see if it was just a scout or not. Also, if they keep sending their own scouts out, well, what can you do to deal with it? Send 2 Marines out to kill their 1 Marine that killed your Marine. And you actually will see this all the time in TVT. You guys go and watch a pro TVT, you'll see these like map control Marine battles. Actually, pro TVT is probably the best example of map control being important, because tank evacs, if they get in a good position, are so powerful. So you will see both players just obsessed with having Marines on the map. And it gets to this point where it used to be in early Legacy, everyone would send 1 Marine to each of these points. But then the other guy's Marine would come and he'd kill your Marine because he would stim slightly faster. So then you'd have to send another Marine. So nowadays you'll see people sending out pairs of Marines, or even little squads of 4 or 5 Marines to clear up their opponent's Marines. And you see this whole kind of complex map control battle happening because, as Leixel said, you want to find out if it's an actual attack or not. The thing is, what Leixel was saying is, well, why not just have it outside your base or on the attack path? So you'll only recognize when it's actually an attack. The thing is, there's no difference. A scout will also come out on the attack path. So it doesn't matter if you're outside their base or in the middle of the map on the attack path, the scout's still going to come past your scout and kill you. So I believe that's actually an overcomplication, getting a little bit convoluted in our minds. Sometimes we think like, oh, there's a difference between them sending a scout and an attack. There's not. Either way, it's better to scout it earlier outside their base, number 1. Number 2, if it's in the middle of the map or outside their base, you're still going to scout it in exactly the same manner. All right. Drax the Drister says, what do I do when my opponent is turtling up, but only on 2 or 3 bases? See, this is something where there's no, you should just do this. It's all about the situation and what's going on. So, turtling up doesn't mean anything. That's exactly what we're getting at today. There's a lot of vague terms which get thrown around in the community. Turtling. He's cheesing. He's all-inning. He's a gambler. These are all vague terms which mean nothing. The PiG Daily, especially, is more and more about trying to help you guys think about the game and use terms that you can always apply to a situation in order to describe it. So turtling doesn't mean anything. What means something is if you scout through and you see signs of aggression or signs of greed. So what you might be mentioning is, what if I see lots of signs of greed, but he's not taking new expansions very quickly? He's kind of just sitting back on his bases. Well, you've always got those options. 2 signs of greed, 1 sign of aggression maybe. The 1 sign of aggression is the lack of an extra base. As we said, you weigh that up on your scale and you say to yourself, well, I could just go all in. I could just build a lot of units and go kill him, because he's mostly on the greedy side of things. And that's a good chance of working. What's the other thing you could do? You could say, well, he's mostly greedy. He can't really punish me very well. I can drone really hard with just a minimal amount of defense. I can build my economy really hard as Terran or Protoss. Obviously, this applies to all races, guys. So it's always about just choosing your own response based on the situation, and you've got so many options available to you. So it's never as simple as just do this, but it's all about recognizing the options you have available. And what you're talking about with someone who's turtling is someone who's mostly on the greedy end of the spectrum. So it's the exact same options we were just talking about when you scout someone who's being very greedy. Twitch chat. Oh, pudding hobo. That's actually good. Just talking about it. This is definitely basement dweller light in the background. He recognizes it as a fellow basement dweller. Yeah, it's true, man. I do live underground. From 1 to 10, how much would you give? Nope, that's not a question. But thank you either way, Talsmooth. Fatespeed says, Pig, do you use takeaway hotkeys? Yes, I use them all the time. I'll ask that again once we're done the show, and I can talk about that a bit more because it's not really to do with it. iCup says, why middle of the road? Doesn't all strategy progress toward extremes? Now that's a great question. So ICCup says, why is your general game plan middle of the road? Shouldn't strategy progress towards extremes. That's it. That's exactly it. That's the thing is, strategy is where you make decisions. Your general game plan is something which happens outside of decisions. You choose your game plan usually before the game even begins. Your game plan is a structure. It's a structure from which you can veer off in many directions. It's flexible, but a game plan gives you something so that when you're in a situation where you don't have information, you simply follow it down the middle of the road. And that will keep you alive and it'll get you to the next stage where you can scout, where you can actually see what's going on. So the whole point of the game plan is it takes you down the middle of the road. It keeps you safe because this is a game of limited information. In battle, you don't ever see a general in war just be like, you know what? Let's just send 90% of our forces down the right flank. I'm not really sure what the enemy's layout is, but we're just going to thrust down here because that's an extreme and it's got a chance of thrusting things in your favor. If you don't have the information to know that he doesn't have a really good defensive position on the right flank, why the hell would you risk that? You're going to risk all your men's lives. It would be insane. It would make absolutely no sense. Strategy should only be done in regards to what you know about your opponent. So what we're talking about here is you start with a very general middle of the road game plan, and then as you scout your opponent, you move towards those extremes to adjust to what you see. And that's what we're learning how to do here with learning how to scout. You see someone who's very greedy, and you can either punish him with your own extreme greed or punish him with your own extreme aggression. We're talking about that branching off and that decision-making process, and this is exactly where it all begins. So that was a really good question. We are going to be doing some coaching after the stream. I see a few questions about that. There's a lot of specific questions not to do with the show. You guys can shout those out again, and I will answer those after. One last question now. Amanak Yoyomix says, Big, what if you're scouting aggression, your opponent doesn't attack, but then you're still preparing a defense? What do you do if you're unsure if he's actually planning to attack? Well, build a few rounds of units or build a certain amount of defense and then can keep on seeking to have that map control. Always send those units out on that map. And after a certain point of time, scouting information becomes less important. If you scout someone showing 3 signs of aggression, 2 minutes later, those signs of aggression aren't as important because there's more time for them to have gone into the greedy options. So while in the immediate point, if you scout 3 signs of aggression and you go, okay, I've got to be safe, build lots of units, build lots of units. If they still haven't attacked, you've got good map control, you haven't seen them move out, minutes have gone by, you just go back to you start shifting as time goes by more and more back towards your middle of the road and you keep scouting. So middle of the road is mixing some economy, some tech with some units. And then you scout them and then you start to make more decisions. So there's always follow-up scouting, there's constant scouting as much as you possibly can. But most of the time, just remember, go back to center, go back to your middle of the road approach, and that's where your standard game plan comes from. And that's the whole power of having a standard build order or game plan, something we talk about a lot in other sessions. So guys, let's finish it up there. I don't want to blabber on too long, though we've already gone for quite a while. Unfortunately, it is too late to submit any new ICFARs because we are doing ICFAR tomorrow. Actually, no, that's the day after. So you guys have one more day to submit ICFAR replays. So the topic was blood sacrifice. So you've got to submit it before this show tomorrow. So you've got about 23 hours. If you guys do want to submit a replay, please do. It's blood sacrifice. 1 unit needs to die every minute of the game. Definitely submit one. Send it through to eonblue95 at gmail.com. The link is in the description below the YouTube video, or it's in Twitch chat, whichever one you prefer. So that's all for now, guys. I appreciate all the support. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a cactus to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.